Welcome to Rediscovering Foods. Today, we're traveling back over 3,200 years to ancient Egypt, where we'll recreate one of the most fascinating breads ever made, the spiral bread of the pharaohs. What makes this recipe extraordinary is that it comes directly from the walls of Ramses III's tomb. No written recipe exists. Instead, ancient Egyptian artists carved detailed scenes showing how this royal bread was prepared. These images, frozen in time since 1155 BCE, are our only guide to recreating this ancient staple. Bread wasn't just food in ancient Egypt, it was the foundation of their entire civilization. It was currency, religious offering, and the main source of nutrition for everyone from peasants to pharaohs. But not all bread was created equal. The spiral bread we're making today was fit for royalty, with a distinctive shape that may have held deep symbolic meaning. Our spiral bread recipe comes from Egypt's New Kingdom period, specifically around 1155 BCE during the reign of Ramses III, the second pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. This was a time when Egypt's power was beginning to wane, but its cultural and culinary traditions remained strong. Bread was so important to ancient Egyptians that they made sure to include bread-making scenes in their tombs. These weren't just decorative, they were meant to magically provide bread for the deceased in the afterlife. The tomb of Ramses III in the Valley of the Kings contains some of the most detailed bread-making scenes ever discovered. Archaeologists and Egyptologists have studied these images extensively, noting the distinctive spiral shape that appears repeatedly. While we don't know exactly why this shape was chosen, spirals held significant meaning in Egyptian culture, representing eternity, the sun's journey, or perhaps the life-giving floods of the Nile. Remarkably, actual bread has been found in ancient Egyptian tombs. While these 3,000-year-old loaves are too degraded to eat, they've provided valuable insights into ingredients and techniques. Scientists have even found ancient sourdough starters preserved in clay pots. The foundation of Egyptian bread was their grain, primarily emmer wheat and barley. These ancient grains are quite different from our modern wheat. They're higher in protein and have a nuttier, more complex flavor, but they also make a denser bread. Emmer wheat, also called farro, was one of the first domesticated crops in the Near East. It has a protective hull that makes it difficult to process, but helps it survive harsh conditions. Barley was equally important and was used for both bread and beer, which, interestingly, were often made together in the same facilities. To sweeten their bread, Egyptians used natural sweeteners like date syrup and honey. Date palms grew abundantly along the Nile, and their sweet fruit was processed into a thick syrup. What's fascinating is that while ingredients like wheat and honey might seem familiar, the ancient Egyptian versions were quite different. Their honey came from native North African bees and had distinct floral notes from desert plants. Their grains were less modified by selective breeding, resulting in lower gluten content but richer flavor. Reconstructing this recipe presents unique challenges. The tomb paintings show the process, but don't include measurements or exact timing. We have to combine these visual clues with what archaeologists have learned about Egyptian baking techniques. From what scholars have been able to decipher, the basic process involved mixing flour with water, milk, or beer to form a dough, adding flavorings, allowing it to ferment, shaping it into spirals, and then cooking it, possibly by boiling first, then baking. The spiral shape wasn't just decorative, it may have had religious significance. In Egyptian symbolism, spirals represented the sun's journey through the sky and the underworld, making this bread not just nutritious, but spiritually meaningful, especially when placed in a pharaoh's tomb. To recreate this ancient bread, we'll need 500-gram mixed barley and emmer flour, 2 teaspoons salt, 125-gram sourdough starter, 300 milliliters warm goat milk, 80-gram date syrup, 85-gram honey. Let's whisk together our ingredients. First, I'll add the warm goat milk. You can use cow milk too. Now I will add sourdough starter. The Egyptians would have used natural fermentation, what we now call sourdough, rather than commercial yeast. They discovered that leaving dough out would cause it to rise, though they wouldn't have understood the microbiology behind it. After adding date syrup, I'm mixing until we have a shaggy, well-hydrated dough. This is a bit wetter than modern bread dough, which is appropriate for these ancient grains as they absorb more moisture. If needed, add a bit more milk to ensure there's no dry flour left. Now comes the interesting part. Instead of kneading continuously, the Egyptians used a repeated rest and knead process. We'll cover the dough with a damp cloth and let it rest for 30 minutes. This allows the grains to fully hydrate and begins the fermentation process. After resting, I'll knead the dough for about 10 minutes. We'll repeat this process 3 times. Knead for 10 minutes, rest for 30 minutes. This develops the structure without overworking the dough. Remember, these ancient grains have less gluten than modern wheat, so they develop differently. Now I'll divide the dough into 4 equal pieces and roll each into a rope about as thick as my index finger. The tomb paintings clearly show this rolling technique, with bakers using the palms of their hands to create long, even strands. Next comes the distinctive spiral shape. I'm coiling each rope tightly, keeping it as flat as possible, then tucking the end underneath and pinching it to secure the shape. The tomb paintings show this exact technique. It's remarkable how little some aspects of baking have changed in 3,200 years. We'll cover these spirals and let them rise again until puffy. This second rise is crucial for developing flavor and ensuring the bread has the right texture. Here's where things get really interesting. Evidence suggests the Egyptians may have boiled some breads before baking, similar to how we make bagels today. I'm bringing water to a boil and adding honey, which will give the crust a subtle sweetness and beautiful color. Using a slotted spoon, I'll carefully lower each spiral into the boiling water for about 2 minutes. This creates a chewy exterior and helps set the spiral shape. The Egyptians might have used large copper cauldrons for this process. After boiling, I'll transfer the spirals to a hot oven, about 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 218 degrees Celsius. The Egyptians would have used beehive-shaped clay ovens called tabuns, which could reach high temperatures and retain heat well. We'll bake for about 15 minutes until the bread is beautifully browned. While our bread bakes, let's talk about the cultural significance of this recipe. Bread in ancient Egypt wasn't just sustenance, it was deeply intertwined with their religious beliefs and social structure. Bread offerings were essential in Egyptian religious rituals. Different shapes of bread had different meanings and purposes. The spiral shape may have represented the sun god Ra's journey through the sky and underworld, a continuous cycle of death and rebirth. Bread was also a form of currency. Workers who built the pyramids and other monuments were often paid in loaves of bread. The quality and type of bread you ate directly reflected your social status, with fine, white bread reserved for the elite and coarser bread for common people. Interestingly, bread and beer production were closely linked in ancient Egypt. They used the same fermentation process, and facilities for making both were often combined. The Egyptians even had a hieroglyph that meant both food and bread, showing how central it was to their concept of nourishment. Our spiral bread is done baking, and it looks remarkable, golden brown with a distinctive spiral pattern that has remained unchanged for over 3 millennia. The texture is dense but not heavy, with a chewy crust from the boiling process. You can see the spiral layers clearly, each with a slightly different texture. The flavor is extraordinary, nutty and complex from the ancient grains, with subtle sweetness from the date syrup and honey. What strikes me most is how practical yet symbolic this bread is. It's nutritionally dense, portable, and keeps well, perfect for a society centered around the Nile. Yet its spiral shape elevates it from mere sustenance to something with deeper meaning, a connection to cosmic cycles and religious beliefs. Nutritionally, this bread is quite different from modern loaves. It's higher in protein, fiber, and various micronutrients thanks to the ancient grains. The fermentation process also makes these nutrients more bioavailable and easier to digest, something the Egyptians discovered through observation and practice. So there you have it. Spiral bread fit for a pharaoh, made from a recipe that survived for over 3,200 years. This isn't just a loaf of bread, it's a time machine that takes us back to the banks of the Nile, to royal bakeries where skilled artisans created these beautiful spirals for their god king. If you decide to make this ancient treat, you'll be participating in a culinary tradition that spans thousands of years. And while we may never know exactly how the ancient Egyptians experienced this bread, we can appreciate the ingenuity and symbolic thought that went into creating it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through ancient Egyptian baking. Until next time, remember that every meal tells a story, sometimes one that's thousands of years old. Happy cooking and happy time traveling through food.